welcome. And we'll go around and introduce everybody. But we don't have anything, I think, other than the handout. So we'll just be hearing testimony from several people. So Mike, you're going to be first?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hi, Mike.
I go by Michael, but
Okay.
call me Mike.
And pronounce your last name for me.
Weiss.
Okay, good. Well, welcome. We met briefly out in the hall beforehand, but I'm David Durfee, chair of the committee. I represent towns of Bennington County, Shaftesbury and Gloucesterbury and Sunderland. And just so you all know who we are, why don't we go around the room. We're going to start over here and we'll give you a quick intro.
Sure. Hi, Heather Supernat, Vice Chair. I represent Windsor 4, which are Barnard, Pofford, and Bridgewater.
Hello again. Esme Cole, Windsor 6, Hartford.
John O'Brien, Royalton and Cudbury.
Mike Rice, Bennington Rutland District, Dorset, Grove, Mount Tabor, and Pillar.
Josie Levitt, Grandal Chittenden, which is Grandal County and West Milton.
I'm David Templeman. I represent Brownington, Barton, and Westmore.
I'm Charles Wilson on Caledonia 3, which is Lindenville, Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, and Newark.
Henry Pearl, represent the towns of Danville, Peacham, and Cannon.
Jed Lipsky, I represent Lamoille 1 District, town of Stowe.
Rodney Graham, represent Williamstown and Chelsea.
So do you want to just quickly tell us who else you have with you?
Sure. So I'm here with a lot of RAD allies and members of Rights and Democracy. So we have Jess Laporte, climate and racial justice community organizer, joined by Minnie Blank, who are both coming from the community resilience organizations and Seeding Power. We have Alex Littner, a member and staff of RAD, our field organizer. Anna Mejia, our state organizing director at Rights and Democracy. Mar Pelaez, Renew's New England's organizing director. And Shane, sorry.
Seeding Power.
Rogers.
Shane Rogers with Seeding Power. Sorry, Shane.
No, it's all right.
That was a lot.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, Jared Durfee and everybody on the Agriculture, Food Resilience, and Forestry Committee for letting us have this time to come and advocate for these policies that we really care about deeply and that our members are really in need of. May I continue, or?
Yes, I just wanted to note that we also have Laura Rich in the room here, who's our committee assistant, and some of you may have met earlier, but so please.
Great, yeah. Thank you. So my name is Michael Weiss, and I'm the environmental justice organizer with Rights and Democracy. And before I begin, I want to share a land acknowledgement with the committee. So Rights and Democracy acknowledges the Mohican in southern Vermont and Abenaki people as the traditional land caretakers of Endokina, which includes parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, New England, and Quebec. As guests on the unceded territory of the Mohican and Abenaki people, we honor their ancestors, elders, and relations past, present, and emerging. We also acknowledge that our nation has benefited from the uncompensated and exploited labor represented in the legacy of slavery and the present day reality of migrant farm workers. Thank you. So Rights and Democracy, which we call RAD for short, and our sibling organization, the Rights and Democracy Institute, were founded in 2015 on a theory of change that it takes people, lots of people, and people power to really make the change year after year for big, bold, and long-term improvements that we all want to see in our country and our state. Our members are from all walks of life, intergenerational, multicultural, activists, organizers, but most importantly, passionate fighters for true social justice and meaningful change in our communities and the state of Vermont. Our current systems are rooted in historic oppressions, deeply dysfunctional and fragile. Vermonters who have been systemically kept out of places of power are those most impacted by these systems. The Abenaki and indigenous people, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA individuals, individuals with disabilities, older adults, Native Americans, youth, new Americans, and poor are the people who carry the weight of policies and systems gone wrong. These individuals are nearly 80% of Vermont's voting population, are the least represented in our state government, and in some cases wholly invisible to those who enact the policies. And that's why we're here today. Our mission is to bring people together to take action, to build healthy communities and make the values of our communities guide the policies of our government instead of vice versa. We believe we can achieve a society where people earn a livable wage and have access to affordable health care, and where a progressive and equitable tax system supports an economy that protects the environment and human rights. It's our pleasure to testify before you today and share our visions of a more just and vibrant Vermont. And I've shared with you all our policy platform for 2023, and I encourage you to look through it, and I'll be speaking more to all those policies because all of these policies work together to build a stronger Vermont. So to begin, Vermont must do its part to ensure a just transition to a clean energy future that mandates renewable energy and ends our reliance on dirty, polluting fossil fuels. And we must guarantee that everybody benefits, especially Vermonters who've been most impacted by past and current harms. That's why this year we're supporting the passage of S5, the Affordable Heat Act, while still calling for greater equity provisions in the bill that prioritize renters, low-income folks, and ensure that heating fuels don't impact our communities, don't hurt our communities. We're also supporting efforts to reform the renewable energy standard and ensure that Vermont can get to 30% in-state renewable energy and 30% regional renewable energy in the next decade. In-state renewable energy is the key to our state resiliency, helps build the green economy that Vermonters need, and doesn't shift the climate burden of our energy to other states and marginalized communities. We're also supporting H54, the Ratepayer Protection and Thermal Energy Network Act. This bill in House Environment and Energy would extend the electric ratepayer protections to more Vermonters, add a proven solution to Vermont's energy choices by creating a pathway for geothermal energy, and moves Vermont away from combusting fuels by prohibiting gas expansion into new service territories. On top of the climate crisis, we know that Vermont is also in a housing crisis. We all know this. There isn't enough affordable housing for Vermonters, and many of us are forced to live in unsafe places that are too expensive. And tenants who bring concerns about their living conditions to landlords also have to worry about eviction and homelessness. That's why we need housing for all. That is why we need to work both on creating new affordable housing, like provisions laid out in the Senate Housing Omnibus Bill, and also we need to protect tenants' rights. The Housing Omnibus Bill includes many needed zoning, Act 250, and housing discrimination changes that we support and hope that the bill will pass the House and Senate. To meet the needs of tenants in Vermont, we also need to pass statewide just cause eviction protections, eviction diversion programs, and cap the amounts of rent increases that tenants will have to bear. Last year, the legislature passed Burlington's city charter change for just cause eviction, but the governor vetoed that bill. We need to build off the 99 votes we got in the House last year towards a veto override and pass that bill this year. We also need to ensure that Vermont has all the data it needs to accurately track our rental market, including where the units are, who owns them, and the accessibility of the unit, and other pertinent information. Without this basic information, we will always be behind on understanding the true rental crisis and its limits, and it limits our ability to take action for Vermont renters. When it comes to public education, we have a long way to go to make all Vermont schools equitable and welcoming for all students. We need to remove police from schools, make anti-discrimination policies more accessible, and develop an education funding system that is as equitable as possible by implementing the recommendations of the Income-Based Education Tax Study Committee. Vermont is known as a leader for voting rights and democracy, and we need to continue that leadership by implementing a system of ranked choice voting for the presidential primaries and then for all elections. Ranked choice voting gives more access to more candidates and gives voters a real choice at the ballot box. We must also create a state legislature that everybody can take part in. This means greatly increasing the salary and benefits of our state legislators and also the per diems for those appointed to state boards and committees. Furthermore, we must address Vermont's overdose crisis. Vermont has become a leader in the deadliness of the overdose crisis. The legislature last year passed many important provisions that were undone with the governor's veto. This year, we must pass permanent buprenorphine decriminalization for personal use, create overdose prevention sites, make accessible community-based syringe services for all Vermonters, create a mobile methadone clinic pilot program, and expand treatment education for first responders. This means supporting H72 and H222. And of course, to both mitigate and prepare for the climate crisis, nurture community and local economies, and support the health of Vermonters, we must create a food system rooted in justice. We must create equitable access to land, farming, and food by addressing legacies of inequity in land ownership and access. We are glad to see the passage of the universal school meals in 2022, but it's time to find a permanent funding solution to ensure that all Vermont's children get the healthy meals they need without stigma. Additionally, the Land Access and Opportunity Board is an equity board created by the legislature in the last biennium and is housed at the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. In the coming weeks, the board will release a report of recommendations that the legislature should consider and take action on. But what we do know now is that the board will need continued funding to do its work. This means a fiscal year 2024 budget adjustment of an initial $1 million for the coming year. This will allow the board to formalize its procedures and set itself up for the long-term work that is needed in creating greater access and opportunity for those in Vermont who have historically been left out. Additionally, workers in Vermont's retail, restaurant, agricultural, and other service industries play deeply vital roles in our communities. Yet, these workers are often underpaid and underprotected in their workplaces. To thrive, all workers need fair and dignified wages, full benefits, and strong legal protections. The sub-minimum wage, a direct legacy of slavery, particularly impacts women and disproportionately women of color. It's time to end the sub-minimum wage and pass one fair wage for all Vermonters. We also need to pass the Vermont PRO Act that strengthens workers' rights. It's important that we lift the voices of the people, and today I'm joined by some of our amazing leaders. Today, 24 individuals are speaking their truths in committees throughout the legislature. Joining me are rights and democracy supporters and allies, as I've already introduced. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it so much. And I'd like to allow Jess to take the stage.
I'll have Cindy just come up with me to be as efficient as possible.
Good afternoon.
Hi everyone. Jess Laporte. I identify with she, her pronouns. I was born and raised in Lamoille County, which is also where my mother was born and raised. And I am speaking as a member of the Land Access and Opportunity Board, but I'm active across the state in a number of BIPOC affinity spaces focused on equity work across a lot of different topics. And I show up in the Land Access and Opportunity Board as somebody actually very well represented by a lot of what Michael said about the people who are involved in RAD. Because I grew up as a low-income Vermonter. I understand how challenging it is to not just gain access to housing and land, but to maintain it. And I'm here to share about the Land Access and Opportunity Board, and I want to know how many of you are familiar with it and its creation, no less. Yeah, yeah, I know. Anyone else?
So no, I'm going to say
So I'll-
on my behalf, but can you just, so for those
Yes.
who aren't, remind us how it came to be?
Yeah, so it's in Act 182. I'm bad with numbers. Section 22. And it originally, the thought behind it and the intent behind it began in H273, which is the BIPOC Land Access and Opportunity Bill. And the purpose of the board always included other protected classes, but now it's very explicitly a part of it. As Michael mentioned, it's under the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And I just wanted to share the intent with you all. Is to acknowledge the structural racism and address prevalent wealth disparities by creating new opportunities to improve access to woodlands, farmland, land, and home ownership for Vermonters from historically marginalized or disadvantaged communities who continue to face barriers to land and home ownership. And as I'm sure on this body, you all are also aware of the challenges of retention once you have land and home ownership. So this board has a few different responsibilities, but a big part of the intent is to have a community base. So there are 11 nominating bodies that are really from community-based organizations that may or may not actually ever interface with the legislature. A number of them are not really lobbying type bodies. I am the representative from the Everytown BIPOC Land Access Project, which works with the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust to increase BIPOC land stewardship in Vermont, and a number of other similarly maybe less represented bodies. I wanted to also share with you all, I think it's really helpful to understand that one of the major purposes or one of the large powers of this body is advisory power over a number of different agencies involved in housing and land access. So VHCB as our fiscal sponsor home, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, the Vermont Economic Development Authority, the Vermont Agricultural Credit Corporation, as well as other programs like those that are created under the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund or the Working Lands. And this is really important because as our state has been having these conversations about equity, we recognize that all of these different institutions and instrumentalities of the state are trying to develop mechanisms to make things more accessible. And this body is an opportunity for partnership and for more continuity and more effective strategies to overcome barriers. And an important part of it is representation of people from those communities, because our kind of cookie cutter income barrier for access to programs is leaving so many people behind. We're talking about more complex households. We're talking about aversion to risk and taking on something even like a forgivable loan to get into ownership because of lived experience, because of factors like immigration within a household, substance abuse, incarceration. And so we're trying through this board to bring members of the community into the creation of those programs. And hopefully over the coming years, we can bring efficiency and more continuity to all the existing programs. But we can't do that as a body of the state. And as we said here, there's only a few people in this room familiar with this board. It's not going to be effective unless we make it the partner that it can be. And so as a member of the board, I'm here to ask for that partnership. And I'm also here to stress the importance of appropriations for this body. Michael mentioned that we're looking at about an initial 1 million for the capacity building. That's including actually hiring staff. I am only compensated for my involvement in that body at the state per diem, which is incredibly unsustainable for the type of thought that needs to go into this work and the relationship building to make it an effective body. So the initial 1 million is kind of what we're seeing for the first year, but what we really would like to see in this year's appropriation is 4 million, multi-year funding. It's not a great job prospect to not have anything secured into the future. And we also want to acknowledge the other community-based bodies that have been created, like the Environmental Justice Council Committee, Advisory Council, thank you, the Health Equity Board, as well as the work that Truth and Reconciliation is going to be doing. We want to do some of our own assessments, but we are 100% in support of the work that those bodies will be doing and will be in collaboration with them. So I hope that helps for some context. And obviously, you can be in contact with me through RAD, but more importantly, be in contact with the Land Access and Opportunity Board through VHCB. We have a landing page on their website. We have contact information. All of our meetings are publicly warned. Agendas and minutes are available there. And I would really love to see more communication from legislatures. So I'm happy to introduce the board, and I hope this is the first of many conversations. Yeah. And Mindy might add some things.
Might add or reiterate. That was wonderful. Hi, I'm Mindy Blank. Thank you so much for having us here today. It's a pleasure and honor to be here to speak with you. I live in Barrie. I have been living in Vermont for my entire adult life. It's my chosen home. I'm also a lifelong climate justice activist and have been shaping policy at state, national, and international levels. The Land Access and Opportunity Board is a board. It's an outcome of, as Jess mentioned, H273, the BIPOC-led Land Access and Opportunity Bill. I'm a member of Seeding Power, which is the coalition behind that initial bill that the Land Access and Opportunity Board was born from. And we've been working on this piece of legislation for the past 3 years. And I have since the Paris Treaty was signed in 2016, I have not been so excited about and hopeful about a piece of legislation and something that is actually really effective in the climate justice sphere, because this lays out the board has already been created. It's already staffed. It's already under VHCB. It's receiving administrative support. And it lays out incredibly clear and tangible ways to actually improve land access. and for the House Committee on Agriculture, Food, Resilience, and Forestry, I think that there are a lot of intersections and a lot of ways that this committee could actually be collaborating with the board. And as Jess mentioned, the board has advisory power and jurisdiction to be working with all sorts of agencies and committees. And I think, when we are considering the amount of dairy farms that are going under in Vermont and how to work on succession of the properties and how to do that, I think that the Land Access and Opportunity Board is a great board to reach out to brainstorm, to figure out some ways to be able to work together. And there are so many different intersections like this that I think that you have. And the appropriation side, this isn't a policy bill. We're not putting a policy bill in front of you and asking you to approve that, but we're advocating for the continuation of this board that has just gotten started, which frankly was tasked with just a massive, massive workload that I'm sure you all can appreciate being in this work and having a new group of people come together and do the work that they have to create the Sunrise Report that's actually coming out at the end of today. So we can celebrate that, which is really exciting. Yeah. But the budget that's set forward in that Sunrise Report is for annual baseline operating budget. That's what it is. Baseline operations. And so what we're doing here, understanding the financial landscape that our state is in this year and having no idea what it's going to be like next year or the following years, we are looking for appropriations for the board to be able to continue for 4 years so that they can actually really go into the work with some longevity and not having to come back to you next year and ask for the basic operations budget, but maybe to be able to come back next year in collaboration, hearing things from other committees and other agencies and asking for more appropriations for specific programs, but not for their basic operating budget. And also in the report, it talks about how at some point this board would like to move away from VHCB, but is also really appreciating that administrative power. So we want to make it clear that VHCB is a pass-through for appropriations, and it's not additional funding for VHCB. It is specifically for the Land Access and Opportunity Board, with the idea that it will be a separate board from VHCB at some point. So thank you so much for listening. Yeah.
Yeah, we might have some, Representative.
Oh, can you just make that report available to us?
Absolutely.
Yeah, send it to Laura and then we can pop it up on our page. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
and also if you want to take a look at Act 182, the Land Access and Opportunity Board, this jurisdiction is spelled out on page 39. So you can read it.
Section
It's
22.
just, section 22. It's just a couple pages. And so I encourage you to check it out.
What was that act number again?
182.
That's what I.
What?
I know.
Oh, and Shane, our lovely seating power member, will email you all. Dividing and conquering. I guess an ending question for you all is, how are some of the policies that are in front of you and that you're working on, how could the LAOB be a partner? In particular, it's very important for us to establish precedent. We do not need, I think with the EJ Council, Health Equity, and the Land Access and Opportunity Board, we've covered a lot of bases for equity work. And rather than standing up new committees of under-resourced community members, are there ways that we can actually bring more precedent to their space in the state policy landscape? So I would hope to hear from some of you like, hey, should we put the LAOB in here? Should we put it in over there? Or when we're talking about creating a new body, are there some that exist already? Yeah.
Representative Lipsky.
First of all, small request. You use acronyms at 100 miles an hour. Still driving at 55.
Oh, I'm glad that it's back and forth, because I'm so confused when I'm here.
I just can't be in this room without recognizing Jess Laporte, how important she, her sister, her mother, her family, her aunts and uncles and cousins have been in my life, my kids' life. She's one of the great leaders of our community, as is her family, and it's just a huge honor.
Thank you.
Yes, well.
There are a lot of us.
All of you, but I specifically wanted to point out, we've spent a lot of time on universal school meals, farm to school, farm to table, focusing on small farming initiatives and opportunities, including, I'm one of the new members here, but there are others that are very much involved with food resiliency and small farm initiatives. So you bring an equity aspect which hasn't heretofore been in the last 6 weeks our focus. So it's very timely that you're here, but it is a focus that's we're seeing a need, and as succession and farming struggles, I feel this committee could advocate with a broader vision. And I also sat on a board that just, so after I left, got on. We had the these were community farms, and there were, I don't know if BIPOC was a word then, but immigrant communities that take advantage of the farm and enterprise access and enterprise initiatives there that make a big impact in particularly in Chittenden County. But so thank you.
Representative Templeman.
Yeah, you finished up by asking us, but it's funny, I was gonna ask you the same question. So how do you see first of all, what have you been doing? I know that it's a new effort. What have you been doing to bring disenfranchised populations to the land, and how can we,
Yeah.
how do we start?
I think the answer to that for me, it happens outside but related to my role on the LAOB. Recognizing that I am not working on the LAOB full time and we are very early on. But I think that what we're finding is that a lot of the economic measurements, for access to funding or lower interest loans, as well as, what do we define as a farm, right? And does food production inherently have to be profitable in order to receive subsidization, in order to receive support from the state? Those are the questions that I ask in general in the work that Mindy and I do with community resilience organizations, the Everytown Land Access and Opportunity Project, because what is existing, whether it's in land conservation or in housing access, there's a lot of households that are falling through the cracks there. So I think the Land Access and Opportunity Board, the hope would be that it grows into both having some of its own programs and also being a navigator of programs. And I think it's really important to establish this institution, which is currently under VHCB, but this instrumentality of the state to be a part of that navigator and a bias for us. We have representation from the Developmental Disabilities Council, National Social Workers Alliance, Pride Center Vermont, and we're seeking to have these community-based support services who understand the intersectionality of marginalization. So I guess in terms of what policies and where I see this fitting in is I have a lot of questions and cannot follow how many times we're using a simple economic indicator as the only equity measure to make something more accessible. And it's all wrapped up in all of the Renew stuff. I want to make sure other people have time to talk, but I feel like it comes up in the Affordable Heating Act. Is that what it's being called these days? Yeah, the Affordable Heating Act, and that only 50% of that funding is allocated, less than 50% of that funding is allocated to low-income households. Who else are we trying to make heating affordable for other than low-income households? I was raised by a single parent working in the service industry with zero benefits, right? So if anyone is supposed to be having those benefits, it's those folks. But we lived in a multi-generational house, and therefore, often through a series of things, you don't always qualify, right? And so my hope is that the LAOB could partner to provide recommendations to policy and to existing institutions, but we also have to be willing to question the basic assumptions of the game in order to do equity work. We can't constantly say, oh, well, we can't actually do that because it might not be constitutional. We can't do that because we're not sure if there's going to be legal blowback. We actually have to be willing to move the end posts. I don't know why I use a sports metaphor. I play hockey.
On that note, then, I've been working on a project outside of this committee in the legislature, and been working with an advocate, Reverend Mark Hughes, who's been
who's on the board.
He's
an alternate to Arnold Thomas.
Surprised. Yeah. I would not be surprised, but. Yeah. So in this particular issue, he was pushing really hard on the equity point, to the level, though, that in many ways it would destroy the structure of the program inherently. So in a way, he's seeing that the existing structure by its nature is unfair to minority populations and to not just minority populations, but to even certain people within the majority population. And I'm just seeing a dilemma here, and I would love to know how we can engage in our current system while inviting other people in. I know it's very abstract.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that's also having to do with the structure of the board appointments and the compensation for the board. I'm not sure if that's particularly what he's talking about, but that's an example of something we have to be willing to question. When the state decides that a piece of work is important enough, they create a commissioner, or there's a department, and those are salaried positions. But we have not decided the equity-based work for whatever protected class that is. We have not yet decided as a state that is something that we are willing to fund and actually resource people to do. And when you sit on these boards, you're not just asked to show up to the meetings, you're then supposed to become the conduit for all of these legislators and different white-led institutions. I'm speaking as a Black femme, to be somehow their Rolodex for all the Black people in Vermont, their Rolodex for all the people working on disability rights, their Rolodex for all the people working on housing access, and especially for tenants. And when I tell you that I am lucky to be compensated for the climate justice work that I do, I'm truly lucky, because most of the people I work with on the community level are not compensated for the work that they do. They want groups like the Vermont Relief Collective to be their Rolodex, to give them access to all of the BIPOC folks all across rural Vermont that people seem to not be able to see themselves in their communities that exist there. But who is actually going to fund these affinity spaces and people providing direct services to the exact populations that are being missed? And so if I don't know if I hold the same position as Mark, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But I do think we need to question. We have tried to do what we can in this initial capacity building budget to increase the compensation for board members. But at a maximum, it's going to be $750 a month. And that does not put a dent in household income. When you look, the uncompensated hours that I and other members have put into this board, just in the first months of its creation, it's not like I can join this board and drop one of my 2 part-time jobs.
Right.
And I'm lucky to be compensating for mission-driven work that I care about, that is related to this. And we want to have board members that may not be somebody who has a recognizable name or an organization that compensates them for full-time work. So I think it's a very difficult experience. And I will say that I choose to be a part of it because I know I have some of the privileges that allow me to do it. But I definitely wouldn't invite just anyone to join a state board. It's a very challenging. I don't invite just anyone to testify. It's a very challenging experience. And I think I think 1 million is a really low ball considering how much our state has put into housing. And how much of the money our state has put into housing is supposed to be about equity. 1 million is a drop in the bucket. But I hope that it can be meaningful, at least for that board, to establish precedents and build capacity into the future. Don't know if that answered the question. But I am cognizant of time. I want to make sure that other important folks from RAD can speak.
Maybe ask you a question that could have a long answer, but
especially if it's me.
Given so there's a report that we'll be able to see tomorrow. Is there anything that you would call our attention to if we had the report in front of us that you would be saying, the work of this committee certainly intersects with this, highlighting that? Anything in particular that you're?
I was going to say Mindy's example of as you're working on land succession, that's one example where the intersection comes in, where as we're dealing with how our full landscape is transitioning in Vermont, whether it's transitioning towards hopefully making multi-family housing more realistic, or if it's succession for farms, I think that it's really important to think about partnering with this body to help provide some of those recommendations, and also to maybe be a part of actually administering those programs in the future. Right. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and something that I would add to that is that the support for the Land Access and Opportunity Board is somewhat similar to the Working Lands Enterprise, where we have a huge organizational base that's supporting this. And so Vermont has this image and reputation, and something we love about Vermont is the working lands, right? Like, we love that it's an agricultural state and a state with forests. And I think that the Land Access and Opportunity Board is the equity intersection there. And so as you are considering grant making, as you're considering new policies, I think the intersection is consulting with the Land Access and Opportunity Board, because you have a group of people, hopefully, who will be compensated equitably within this to be reference people. And so you can look at this board also as a reference for how you are doing your policy making and grant making going into the future.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Michael, who's next?
We'll have Alex Littner.
Okay.
You went over that thing so lower. I feel like we're all like lined up.
Hello. I'm not as articulate, so I prepared pre-written testimony. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, members of the House Committee on Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry for welcoming me today. My name is Alex Littner. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently the Vermont field organizer with Rights and Democracy. I'd like to extend my gratitude to you all for your decision to serve Vermont in such a meaningful way. A little bit about myself. I just moved to Montpelier with my partner, and we moved here from the Sacramento Valley in California, where we were both farm workers and food system advocates. Part of what drew us to Vermont is that we know Vermonters are deeply committed to co-creating resilient, just, and ecologically vibrant food and farming communities. During this session, your committee has a lot of exciting opportunities to advance goals of food justice, land equity, and ecological and community resilience. Today, many low-income and BIPOC households across Vermont face food insecurity. A 2021 University of Vermont study demonstrated that when compared to white individuals, BIPOC individuals in Vermont were almost twice as likely to go hungry each month from lack of access to affordable and nutritious food. The study also found that households with children were almost twice as likely to face food insecurity in Vermont. Hunger is a racial and social equity issue. Food justice requires implementing changes that guarantee access to nutritious, affordable, and culturally appropriate food for all Vermonters across race and income. With this in mind, I urge this committee to advance these goals of equitable access and affordability by providing permanent funding and support for universal school meals. All children deserve access to nutritious meals to support their learning and development while at school. By providing breakfast and lunch to all students at no charge, you improve nutritional equity and ensure all students have access to healthy meals without stigma. Additionally, I urge this committee to secure permanent funding and support for the Local Foods Purchasing Incentive Grant, which provides a financial incentive to schools to purchase food locally for their school meal programs. This incentive program benefits farmers who need a reliable market and students who need nutritious meals, and it supports a vibrant local economy here in Vermont. Food justice also requires implementing changes that ensure social and racial equity and land access. I believe equal access to land is a human right, a right long denied to BIPOC citizens. Farming and land ownership in Vermont is enmeshed with racism and the legacy of slavery, settler colonialism, and the genocide of Indigenous peoples, and racial capitalism. This multi-century enmeshment has a profound impact today on who owns farmland and who benefits from ownership of farmland. According to a 2017 U.S. agricultural census, 97.7% of Vermont farms are white-owned today. For all these reasons and so many more, I urge this committee to secure permanent funding and support for the Land Access and Opportunity Board, which was spoken about prior much more eloquently. The Land Access and Opportunity Board was created in 2022, as you already heard, to improve land access for BIPOC farmers and other marginalized communities across Vermont. Finally, I urge this committee to take action based on the findings in the final report of the Payments for Ecosystem Services and Soil Health Working Group. I support their pilot program, the Vermont Farmer Ecosystem Stewardship Program, that works to supplement the USDA NRCS's Conservation Stewardship Program. We all rely on farmers not only for food and sustenance, but also to protect our natural resources for present and future generations. Farmers who champion climate and environmental stewardship should be compensated for these services. While farming in California the past several years, I engaged with the Healthy Soils Program, a statewide financial incentive program for farmers who adopt practices that enhance soil health. In California, I saw firsthand how this additional source of funding for farmers spurred all sorts of innovative on-the-farm soil conservation projects that otherwise would not have taken place due to lack of financial resources. In the results of the 2022 Vermont Farmer Conservation and Payment-Free Ecosystem Services Survey prepared by the working group, it was found that 94% of Vermont farmers believe they have the knowledge base and technical skills to improve soil health, but only 58% have the financial capacity to implement these soil and society beneficial practices on their farm. This statistic clearly demonstrates that a payment model for ecosystem services and soil health would unlock new and creative conservation potential on farms across Vermont. When developing and implementing the statewide pilot program, I suggest that it is critical that, 1, you continually center farmers' voices and needs, paying particular attention to farmers who've been historically and ongoingly discriminated against and marginalized. 2, you do not succumb to carbon tunnel vision, but maintain a holistic vision of soil and ecosystem health. And 3, you explicitly position this payment for ecosystem services program within a larger just transition framework and continually center racial equity and social equity across program planning, implementation, and evaluation. Thank you for your time.
Could we ask you a few questions if there are any?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Any members? Carbon tunnel vision, is that the expression you use?
Yeah, so are you asking what it means to me?
Do you mind just, yeah.
Yeah, so I studied soil science in college, and I worked on a farm in California that was really focused on becoming a climate smart farm. But I think a lot of the times you're so focused on quantifying soil organic carbon as a metric for compensating farmers that you lose track of all these other really important indicators of ecosystem health and vitality. Like what are the insects on your farm? What are the pollinators on your farm? What is the microbial population that's, helping you out in your roots? What's the wildlife situation? So I think not just narrowing in on carbon, because the climate crisis and our environmental justice crisis is not just siloed. It's not just carbon. It's also nitrogen. It's phosphorus, and it's beyond just nutrients too. It's organisms. So I think it's really easy to just fixate on carbon and fixate on measuring carbon as like a solution, but it's way too narrow, and it also ignores all these human dimensions in addition to all these ecological dimensions that I think need to be considered for holistic measurement of what is a healthy, resilient farm and food system.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Just
very short comment. Alex, all those soil science deep dive that you articulated is exactly what true forest, sustainable forestry, and forest ecology is about. It's beyond recreation, wood, clean water, forest products, clean air, and carbon storage. It's that whole complex microorganisms that nobody's aware of, but loggers are actually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we'll hear from Anna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Anna Mejia. As Michael mentioned, I'm the Vermont Organizing Director with Rights and Democracy. But I also wear many other hats in the community. And I live in Heartland, Vermont. I've also been a member of the Vermont Relief Collective for a while. Through my work with Relief Collective, I was also serving as an alternate with the Land Access and Opportunity Board, and just generally in the climate justice ecosystem in Vermont. And what I hope to do today with my testimony is a little bit address your question of what is this committee doing? How can the Land Access and Opportunity Board tie in, and especially with what Alex was naming with the payment for ecosystems services. So I want to name just that is, I see great opportunities and also great risk if we don't have a Land Access and Opportunity Board. When you talk about rolling out a program, Payment for Ecosystem Services, when we've heard the statistics of who currently has access to land, to stewarding land. So if you roll out a Payment for Ecosystems program, that when you know that there are these existing barriers that haven't been resolved, then who is benefiting and who isn't? So ensuring that at the same time as you're, appropriating funds for these types of programs, we are appropriating funds to make sure that those programs are equitable, are accessible, and removing the barriers to people, because we know that despite the statistics around BIPOC farmers and land caretakers, I think that's the word. While many Black, Indigenous people of color are not on the lease on the land, may not own the property, there are many of us, people of color, who are working with the land, that are growing food, and have so much knowledge, make so many contributions to our state, but don't reap sometimes those financial benefits, the ownership benefits. And so I see the Land Access and Opportunity Board as a mechanism for ensuring there's a pathway towards not just being in service. And again, just underscoring the dangers maybe. I don't want to sound too alarmist, but we really need to be pursuing these two in tandem. They are complementary. And that's it. I'll keep it brief. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much for joining us at the table today. If there aren't questions, is there anybody else, Michael, who's gonna?
That's all of us, unless anybody wants to add on to anything.
Representative Levitt.
Okay, Heather, I'm scooping you a tiny bit. You and I talked about this a little bit at the Milton Library. How do you address, how can I phrase this? The seeming unconstitutionality of favoring one group over another. And yes, there's protected status. I understand that. And this is sort of for all of you. But then how do you, because we're grappling with something right now with the farm thing and another housing thing. And how do you address the issue of this group, for lack of a better phrase, gets preference over basically white people? And how do you balance the people who are then going to sue you and address that as an unconstitutional thing? Because you're discriminating. And I don't agree with that, but I also feel like how do we right that wrong without getting always caught up in the legality of now you're favoring a different group at the exclusion of another group?
Yeah, so
Jess, do you wanna?
yeah, and I wanted to say, Shane just let me know that the report did just come out. So
Okay.
hot off the press.
Oh, nice.
To the,
Today or tomorrow.
Jessica, why don't you come back up to the table if you want to try and tackle that?
Also because of the microphone.
Sit there too.
Yeah,
You both can sit, just slide them back.
There's plenty of room for you. I mean, I'm not fun sized like you, but. So I think the constitutionality was obviously one of the biggest challenges with moving forward with H273 as it was written. And the report does address, we have a whole subsection and our legal counsel provided a primer for us on the 14th Amendment, which is where really that constitutionality argument comes from. And I think this is related to my comments earlier about we have to be willing to question the basic assumptions. I mean, we are all living in a reality where the 14th Amendment was intended to protect people based on different classes, and instead is constantly weaponized against them. It's why we turn to the economic indicators to access programs. And I think it is important for us to consider what are the pathways we are willing to take to push back against that precedent and to create a new precedent. So I think part of it is we are looking at utilizing a model that would allow us to subgrant to community-based organizations that might not necessarily, like community-based organizations like the nominating organizations for that body and other programs in the community that are not exclusive to, but are adaptive towards people of protected classes. So in that case, it might be people who are working with, the psychiatric survivors. Oh my gosh, there's an organization, institution. They're a part of the LAOB. It might look like subgranting, and how do you create pathways to housing and land access for people who have been institutionalized for mental illness, right? They're not going to exclusively provide funds to only people, but their programs or their approach to it will be adaptive to those circumstances. So I think rather than this instrumentality of the state directly running protected class based programs, they want to bring in the voices, experiences, and existing programs to further resource them in this area of housing and land access. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah,
Because
well,
I think-
absolutely.
Yeah, because like it will, the way that we are suggesting the board be established, not be established as it's going to be money only specifically to one protected class. It's about all of these protected classes and acknowledging that we don't have the depth of resources within the state institutions right now to reach those communities effectively.
Right.
So there's somebody way better than me, even though I'm in the immigration process. How do you adapt for documentation status and immigration? How do you adapt for, different statuses and housing access? If that makes sense.
No, it absolutely
Yeah.
does. And I really like your phrase of, the 14th Amendment has been weaponized.
It has.
And I'm really
100%.
feeling that, and I'm feeling timidity around pushing up against that.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, that was incredibly helpful about how to push back in a way that is going to calm everybody down, but ultimately do what you want it to do.
And this is something that I talk about in other areas of the work that I'm doing around equity, which is there's this big desire for everyone to be able to do everything, like each individual body, whatever it is, this committee, institution of the state, to be like the wraparound services. And the point is, the way that we create wraparound services is by resourcing more groups to do what they're doing. So rather than everyone standing up their nice little equity program, which quite frankly, thus far have been very ineffective for many people and situations, is rather actually saying, how do we resource the people who are on the front lines of providing those essential services? And so when we want to solve housing, there's going to be a strategy from the Pride Center that looks different from Psychiatric Survivors, which looks different from the Everytown Land Access and Opportunity Project. And we need to actually be putting our state funding out there for that support. And the hope is that the LAOB is that connection point, that bridge.
Right.
Maybe that's just my vision, but.
No, that was really nicely explained.
Yeah.
I want to build off on that and why that's actually like a bigger bang for your buck than having the state be the ones that's like disseminating these funds. And just noting that because these are organizations that are led by, that are representing these constituencies, they have that trust. They have that like cultural capital. Mm-hmm. They don't have necessarily the like monetary capital to actually deliver the robust services that they want to. But that's something that I have seen even with some of the programs that, for example, BHFA has been trying to roll out. It's just like the distrust of like, we have, when they reach out to us and say like, hey, talk about like the first generation home buyer stuff. Like if it's coming from an organization, let's say like Peace and Justice Center or Everytown, there's like, okay, like, the attachment of that entity is like, all right, I trust that this is going to be, this is actually relevant to me. And not like, oh, this is a VHFA, this is a state thing. And it's going to be such a hurdle, because that's what people's experience has been when they try to apply for any state, like Medicaid benefits, food stamps. And so that kind of degree of removal and like authority and to some, well, maybe not authority, but to those community organizations is critical to ensure that they're actually effective.
I just working with folks in community spaces, like how many times we try to band together with each other to help each other fill out state applications. And we're not successful. Like, we spend a lot of uncompensated time trying to navigate the systems with each other and for each other, and then we still get denied. Versus if we are able to kind of be more resourced to support our community more directly. Yeah, and I mean, I'll be honest with you all. It's all of the money that has gone into having listening sessions that are not even hosted by us and for us.
Right.
Like and you maybe you get one person helping to, like, the facilitator might be from the community they're trying to talk to, but like, I am personally, as somebody engaged in a state body, I know that I have very little energy left to go to another listening session because I'm not seeing that converted into action. And I really trust community-based institutions to convert it into action.
Right.
And often funding is a huge hurdle for people to overcome, to say we already know what the needs are, but we don't have the dollars to put behind it to answer. So, yeah. Oh, it's getting hopping out there.
Other questions? Well, okay. Well, thank you again for coming in.
I just add one thing real quick.
Sure, do you want to?
Yeah. Oh, great.
Hi, my name's Shane Rogers. I'm with Seeding Power Vermont, one of the advocacy groups behind it. I think just wanted to put a bow on this, that we realize again that this is not a policy position we're asking of this, but we're asking for the support in the appropriations process. The report you're going to receive has a baseline budget for 1.2 million to get the work up that Jeff and Anna and everybody said needs to happen at a minimum. So we would love to see 4 years of funding go into this as an investment to keep this equity work moving forward for them to be able to move forward. I just wanted to make sure that's perfectly clear. So as you're talking to your colleagues and as we ask for advocacy help, that is where we really would love to see that support, so that they don't have to come back in and justify how important this work is every single year. Right. So thank you very much.
Anything else to add, Michael, to wrap things up?
No, I just want to thank everybody again, and I appreciate your time and for bringing us, letting us all come in. And on behalf of RAD and Renews and Seeding Power and all of us, I thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
I think I heard somebody say the report that you mentioned is
Sunrise report.
published.
Shane will.
We'll get it out tonight
Okay.
as fast as we can.
It'll also, the LEOB has a landing page on the VHCB website.
Yeah.
So it will be posted there, and you can see all the other stuff that we've been working on. Or suggest to us, like, we meet every other Monday evening. Not that you all need another meeting, but if you think there's something happening that board should be aware of, you can come and participate. It's a public, they're all publicly, whatever.
Will you include that information when you?
Wow, from articulate to.
Yeah, I really lost me. 30 seconds.